Hello out there, you computer scientists. I am excited to have you back for another lesson in learning how to program in Python. Today we are in lesson 3 in our workbook on Introduction to Computer Science using Turtle. We're using the Turtle module to really kind of get to fun stuff immediately, get to do some graphics, and really get to see what's happening. If you haven't downloaded the lesson book, it's at my webpage. Just Google Jed Wilshire and go to Computer Science 1 and download it. I'm in lesson 3. You can follow along in that booklet. We're going to start with the first program. So in our last lesson, we made a pretty cool thing. We made a program. And programs have a file that are called modules. So every program has to have at least one module. And some programs have multiple modules, but that's what we call a file in Python. And we made a module called star. And it was great because we could run it, right, over and over again. Every time we wanted to see that star get drawn, we could do it. But there was one major limitation in that we were stuck with it. We were stuck with that size. And that's not really what we want a program to do. We want computer programs to be able to adapt to situations. We want to abstract from the situation and say, okay, how can I write code that will solve this problem? And then if there's this little bitty change, it can adapt and solve that problem. That's what we're looking for. And the way we're going to do that is by using variables. So variables to the rescue today. Let's make a new module and let's call it star sizer. So I'll make a new and then I'll save as. And let's try and save it wherever it was that you have got, your working directory here. I'm going to just make another folder here. And we're going to call this star sizer. So our first line of code from turtle import star. And let's say length gets 200. That's what we're going to do. So I've made a variable. I'm making a variable called length. Now, variables can be a single letter. So maybe, we could say X. Variables could be multiple words like maybe I'm talking about the side length. But if you use multiple words, we want to use this underscore, which is shift the minus sign. And then you can see that it looks like two words spaced out, but variables have to be one word in length. Okay? Well, I'm just going to stick with the word length. Now, if I used a variable name like X, that's pretty discouraged. I know you're used to X from math class, but it's not a good idea in computer science because I don't know what that stands for. I don't know what it's doing. We want to use variable names like length. Okay, that makes sense. I know that we're talking about the length of something. If I have several different variables, X, Y, Z, and one's length, one's time, none of that stuff's going to make sense to us. And when we come back and revisit programs later on, it can be really difficult and you have to read it. You don't remember what you typed. You don't remember what these variables were. So make your variable names meaningful. All right, now most of the rest of this code is going to be the same as our star program. So I'm just going to hide the turtle this time. If you want to leave the turtle showing, that's fine too. Play around with the code, see what you can get to be different. And I'm going to start with it at -80, -20 again. And we started by turning left 72 degrees. Remember, the turtle starts pointing at 0 degrees, which is directly to the right. And I'm going to go forward, and I'm going to say length. Then left 216, I think was what it was, right? And I'll go forward length. That's going to be the next side. There should be 5 total. Then left 216. Then I'll go forward length. Then I'll turn left again, another 216. And I'll go forward length. And I'll turn left another 216. And I'll go forward length. So that's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different side lengths will in the fill now. Okay, so just a couple of things I want to talk about. Again, these are calls to functions that our turtle can do. We can pick the pin up, we can hide it, we can change the color. I want to remind you that every call, every command, when you use a function, we say calling it, has to have these parentheses. You'll notice though that we finally have some code that didn't have parentheses at the end of it, and that's the storing of a value in a variable. So I'm not calling some function name length, I'm creating a variable. So key difference there. All right, let's run it. It should basically behave the same way as earlier. All right, but now I can change the size and make it bigger. Make it a 400 instead, and I'll run it again. It's so big it's like off the screen. There it goes. And you can see it's quite a bit bigger. I can make it small. And because I use that length variable over and over and over again, it changes size without having to change all those numbers. Much more powerful code, right? All right, a couple more things to talk about. The variable, when I say length gets 20, notice I try not to say equals. I'm trying to say gets because we are assigning. If you look following along the workbook, you'll see that what we're saying is that the 200 is being shoved into length. It goes from right to left. And think about it as length getting the 20. We're not saying length equals 20. Now, I know in math class, you could say something like, don't code this in, let me just show something. I could say x equals 5, and someone else could say 5 equals x. Well, which answer is correct? Well, as long as x is 5, then that's the right answer, right? Both of them. But this is not okay in Python, because the assignment has to go right to left. If there were an arrow instead of an equal sign, we would use an arrow showing that the value of 20 is being stored in the value of length. There's actually a different symbol for equals in Python, and it's actually two equal signs, but we're not getting to that today. So remember, the equal sign is about assigning something from the right to the left. It's an arrow going right to left. And I could use all sorts of funky variable names. We discussed that they should be something meaningful, but there are a few rules that you have to follow. You can't start a variable name with a number. It has to start with the letter, although it can have numbers in it. I could have like length 1, length 2, length 3, length 4, length, etc. I can have length 7 if I had 7 different lengths. So I can add numbers, but I can't start with them. We've already seen we can have underscores. We talked about that. But you should always begin your variables with lowercase letters, like I did here with the lowercase l. Don't use capital letters to start a variable, because capitals we're going to learn are for something very special. All right, so this is good coding habits, to use a variable name that is meaningful. Another bit of good coding habit is to comment. The comment is a way of talking to your future self when you're reading this code, or talking to other people that might work within your code. These big projects, these huge programs and video games, they have, if you've ever finished a video game, you've seen the credits roll by. I mean, it's thousands of people working on these games, and they all have to be able to read each other's code, communicate, and talk to each other. So we use comments to make it happen. Now, I can't just say sets say I want to explain that this sets the size of the star's edge. Well, the problem is now that you can see it's already trying to do stuff. The Python's going to try and run this code. It's going to say, I don't get it. I don't know what that is. I can run it. It's going to give me all sorts of, what is this? This is not, there's no function called sets, So what we have to do is put a pound sign in front of it, the hashtag shift3, and that makes it a comment. And you see they kind of Thorny grays it out, and now you'll see that no, it works just fine now, because when it's got a hashtag in front of it, you're telling the computer, please ignore these words. These are just words to help me when I read it. So later on, I'm like, whoa, what is length? What length am I setting? Oh, it's just the size of the star's edge. All right, that makes sense. Okay, so that's how we add comments. All right. let's take a look at how we could make the. Let's see how we can make use these variables to make our star all sorts of different lengths. I tell you what if we wanted to make our star half as long as whatever value this is? Well, we can simply use division operator. So I could go in here and divide each one of these by 2. Now this is, you might be wondering, well, why don't we just put in a smaller number? Well, sometimes, and a lot of times with computer science, there is in electronics, like the value that we want someone to put in. I might say, hey, how big do you want your star? How big do you want your star? You want it from like, put in a number from 1 to 100. And then in reality, I have to use a multiplier that goes from 0 to 1. And so I'm going to take that value and I'm going to shrink it down to the code that I want it. So, maybe we don't want them putting in length that's too big, so we divide it all by 2. And just, you can see that the way I do that is I just put the divide by 2 on each one of those, and it should work fine. I can make a star bigger. I can make it bigger than they put in by 75% bigger by multiplying it by 1.75. So, and I can do that in the front or the back. I could also change the value of their length by reassigning length to 1.7 times. I'll show that in a second. 1.75. So this is 75% bigger than the value they put in. So now my star should be bigger than the value they put in. You'll notice that I'm multiplying by 1.75 every time though, and I'm doing that so that I keep their length the original 200. But I could also do something like this. I'll put it right here. I could say length gets length times 1.75. And now in algebra class, this statement really wouldn't make a lot of sense. But remember, this isn't an equal sign; it's an assignment operator, and it does the assignment last. So it's going to take the value length, which is whatever we put right here, multiply it by 1.75, which would give me a new value of 300 something, 350 I think, and then it would take that value and put it back into length. So it's going to length is 200. Then we multiply by 1.75, and then we write over that old 200 with the new value. And so now I don't need that anymore to get that enlargement. So that's another way that we can use variables to do those kind of things. All right. So, I'll tell you what, just for fun though, let's completely mess up the star. You ready? Let's make one of these 1.5 times as long. I'll get rid of this line again. And this would be good to do on your own. Play around with the different, ways that you can mess up different side lengths. Ooh, let's make one of these negative. That's a good idea. Negative length. We could say -1 times, but Python allows us just to put a negative sign in front of a numeric value. I'll make this one half as big, 0.5. And I'll leave the last one the same. One thing you'll notice is that I don't have to put, if I wanted to say like 0.6 times length here, I don't have to put a space in between the number and the time sign. It just makes it look better. So Python ignores the space, but it's usually considered good style to do that. All right, let's see what that does. This should be pretty horrendous, right? Actually, I don't know. It's kind of a cool shape, to tell you the truth. But let's take it back, though, to where it's just length. I want to make sure we have that. We play with this a lot. I want to make sure you have that idea down, that variables can be extremely useful, okay? Okay, so you've got several different exercises to do in your workbook. Let's just quickly talk about them to make sure that you understand what you're supposed to do. So I want you to take that star sizer program that we just worked on, and I want you to specifically look at this line right here, this go-to line. If you've got your numbers turned on, it's line 7, okay? Line 7 says go to -80, -20. That I want you to play with that. I want you to find a way to make that value more to the bottom left hand corner than the bigger it is. So, for example, if I put in a side length of 400, I really should be able to fit this star. But you'll notice it goes off the screen because I don't start. That's that negative 80, negative 20. That's not near enough down, and it's barely far enough left. So, is there a way that you could use the length to calculate how far away to go? You may have to play with it. Now, you can't. I'm probably not going to be able to put just minus length. You may have to multiply length by half on the x, or 3/4, or 1.5 on the y. But we practice doing that, so you ought to be able to do that. Okay. All right. Next, you need to make a brand new module called bullseye. Okay. And on this program, I want you to have one variable for the radius of an inner ring. And I want you to have another variable for the width between them. Okay? So let's start on that one, okay? So if you haven't noticed, we're talking about these because this is definitely a jump up in difficulty level, but that's how you learn how to program. You have to think, okay? You have to problem solve and play with it. Don't be afraid to try something and have it not work. So I'll make you would say file, save as, wherever you're working, and you call it bullseye. And these, wherever you save it, remember, because that's the file you'll need to upload to me. All right, so what I'm looking for is some sort of variable like radius that gets 40, and width gets a value of 10. Now, this particular set here, and I did this with my kind of answer program, all I should have to do is change those two numbers. Okay? So what I mean is, like, you should have a whole bunch of code down here, okay? Bunch of code down there, right? And then if I open up your Python file, I should be able to change this and change this and get all these different shapes. So you can see this one here has an inner radius of 100, but I made a very small width between the rings of only 3. And so now those 3 rings are really tight together. Almost looks like a bicycle wheel. This one's a little bit more like a dartboard uniform. This one's a little more. So that's that radius is the starting radius that you're at. So in this one, it's 40 from the center to this first ring, and then this next ring would be 40 plus 10. This next, So you're going to have to use some kind of arithmetic in your work there. All right. Excuse me. All right, I want you to write a program that writes the graphics window the same word 5 times. So you're going to need to use a variable to store that word, but remember, use quotes around it. So make another program. I want you to call this program. Let's call it word writer. So word_writer. Still don't use 2 different words for your Python module names. That can cause serious problems. So whatever you can call it, word. And hey, how are you? That's actually multiple words. I don't care. But what I want to see is I want to see that written in the screen 5 times. But I don't want it written over itself. I want it written, and then I want to be able to read the words that I type in 5 different times. Okay? So you could, when you play around with the right function of the turtle, but when you do it, I think it moves left to right. You can always reposition the turtle back down. There's several different things to look at there. I want you to play with that. Okay, so turn those. That should be 3 different assignments. The star sizer. You're just making a small different change to that. The bullseye, and then you get to play with the writer program. All right, turn those in, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.